If you have been with us in our sermon series studying through 1 Samuel, now coming to 2 Samuel, then you already know the story. For those of you that don't, David is now king over all Israel. Where's the throne? Has found the city, has conquered the Jebusites, has taken Jerusalem as his own, and from now on it'll be called the city of God. And in short order, he wants to bring the Lord into this, create a not a safe place, but a sacred place. And it will be a city more than just the center and hub of the Israelite community. It'll be the place where the Lord resides. And to do that, he wants to bring the old Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. It's been on this journey of its own, if you know the story. Even captured at one point by the Philistines and left with them for a while. The Lord plagued them so much they wanted to return it. So they put it on a new cart and took it back or sent it back to Israel. It's resided in a couple places, but David is excited to bring it home, he would say, I think, to Jerusalem. Now, before we read from 2 Samuel 6, if you don't know this chapter, now we'll read parts of it, but let me just tell you, these two stories in my past have scared me, made me smile, and intrigued me. And maybe you have had a similar experience, but let's read it. Chapter 6, if I butcher the names, you can butcher them as you read it too. David again brought together all the able young men of Israel, 30,000. He and all his men went to Baalah in Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord Almighty, who is enthroned between the cherubim on the ark. They set the ark of God on a new cart and brought it from the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. Uzzah and Ahio, sons of Abinadab, were guiding the new cart with the ark of God on it, and Ahio was walking in front of it. David and all Israel were celebrating with all their might before the Lord with castanets, harps, lyres, timbrels, sistrums, and cymbals. It appears that in haste to bring the ark to Jerusalem, David has not even bothered to seek the Lord's guidance. That's what it appears to be. He must have known, or should have known, what the priest should have told him if he didn't already know. And maybe they didn't say anything. Maybe they're all in ignorance right now, but somebody should have said something, or the next thing that happened is going to happen. But it shouldn't happen. Somebody should have taken a little time to discover. The priest, the Levite, should have informed somebody, passed it down through the years. Somebody should have explored what was written in the law. And if they would have known that and said that, then they wouldn't have had happen what's about to happen. It's Exodus 25. When the Lord tells Moses to tell the people that the poles must be put into the rings on the sides of the Ark of the Covenant, and those poles must remain there, and never should they be removed, and that's how it would be carried. In Numbers 4, when this tabernacle would be set up and then taken down and moved to the next place, set up and then taken down and then moved to the next place, you didn't just throw it together or throw it up. Only certain people did certain things. And so as that tabernacle would be taken down, the holy items within it, it was to be the descendants of Kohath, and only the descendants of Kohath who could move the holy things. So Aaron and his sons would go in and get it all ready to move, and would close it all up and cover it all up so that nobody could even see what they were carrying. And then the Kohathites would come in and they would pick it up and move it, but not looking at it, what was covered up, and not touching it, but only by the poles. If they looked at it or touched it, they would die. Remember that. They would die. That is the law. That's the Word of God. That's the way it had to be done, and God could not have been clearer. So what happens? Verse 6. When they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah reached out, took hold of the ark of God, because the oxen stumbled. The Lord's anger burned against Uzzah because of his irreverent act. Therefore God struck him down, and he died there beside the ark of God. Wow. Well, that's something. And when I used to be sitting where you are, and a preacher would go over that story, and it seemed to go over that story at different times, it shook me. I shivered a little bit in my skin. I didn't like reading that. That seems crazy that a man would have just reached out to steady the ark, thinking maybe he's helping, and he's struck dead. The Lord's anger burned against Uzzah, struck him down. And let's be clear about this before we move on. First, as it's been said many times, you can be sincere and sincerely wrong. And Uzzah may have been sincere, but he was sincerely wrong. These things like sincerity and nice feelings and good intentions and hopeful outcomes, we may say those are nice to have, but it doesn't mean God is pleased with that. So please understand that. We Americans have put a high value on good intentions, but it doesn't mean it brings God's blessing. He demands obedience, and He wants respect, and He wants honor, and He will get it. Now, to know this too, though, is important. God is patient, and God is long-suffering. In the Scriptures it says He doesn't want anyone to perish, but He wants all to be saved. That's how it says it. So even right now, today, let's just say there are people who don't care about Jesus. They don't know the Lord. They don't recognize God as God. People can blaspheme. They can take His name in vain. You hear it all the time. They laugh. They reject Him. They figure He's a laughingstock. It's not true. It's the greatest joke in all of history. God allows that, and He will allow that for a time. But the day is coming, Paul says in Romans 14, the day of judgment, and he quotes from Isaiah the prophet speaking for the Lord, saying, at that point every knee will bow and every tongue will confess or acknowledge God. Even in the Old Covenant, when it seems people are dying at times for not doing the right thing, I hope you know God didn't strike everybody down who sinned. If He did, no one would be alive then or today. Even in the Old Testament, God didn't punish immediately everyone who dishonored Him. Of course, there were times when He did, like this one. There were times when He didn't let it pass, didn't let it go, had to wake the people up, make an example, say this is true. There were times when He had to rebuke and had to punish and struck people down who had gone too far. Just in the time of Noah, do you know when God stepped in to take control and punish or sometimes destroy? Do you remember when Miriam, the sister of Moses, along with her brother, stood up against Moses as if they had a right to do that, and she was punished? One Israelite man collected some wood on the Sabbath, which was forbidden by God. He was taken outside the camp and stoned. Do you remember when the earth opened up and swallowed the rebels against Moses? How about Nadab and Abihu, sons of Aaron, offered something to God which they must not do. They did, and it wasn't right, and they were killed too. There are some stories like that, but please know there are plenty of other stories where God doesn't wipe everybody out, even if He has the chance. Sometimes He did. Sometimes He had to. Look at the story of Noah and the flood. But if you look at all those times when He allowed sinners to live, you are looking squarely into the face of a merciful, gracious God, who at times has to do this, but overall doesn't want to and doesn't have to if He can help it. Why would God punish somebody like Uzzah? You could ask it another way. Why would Uzzah be so bold as to do what he must not do when it was very clear what he must not do? Take Nadab and Abihu in Leviticus 10. They weren't ignorant. They were very smart. They already knew what God had said. Their father surely had told them. Moses had surely told him. If all they had to do was listen, surely their ears on their head would have worked. But God is very specific about the fire, really the ingredients of the incense. For them not to care and just to mix whatever they want, change it just a little to make it their own. God strikes them down for good reason when He says, even to Aaron, their father, as they have died, among those who approach me, God says, I will be proved holy in the sight of all the people. I will be honored. I will be honored. We sometimes want to give people like Uzzah the benefit of the doubt and then blame God. Why isn't it the other way around? God is holy. God is blameless. God is righteous. God is right. God is God. And He has the right as God to demand whatever He wishes. If people want to disregard what He says, disobey Him, choose to do their own thing, they can. Consequences will follow because God is God, and I will be honored, He says. And even if it reflects badly on someone, let it be the one who disobeys, not on the God who is God. In January 2017, there was this tourist who was killed by some tigers. The Mirror reported it. very sad because the onlookers watched helplessly. It happened at the Ningbo Younger Zoo on China's east coast. And there were these 3 tigers in their enclosure minding their own business, doing what tigers do. They were eating. And there was this man, Mr. Zhang, who came into their territory, and what happened to Mr. Zhang was awful. But what happened earlier in Mr. Zhang's story is he brought his family to the zoo, along with another man who brought his family to the zoo, and they let the women and the children go in, and they snuck around, not paying the ticket, snuck around to get in themselves. So Mr. Zhang goes with this other man. The other man goes about halfway and turns back, but Mr. Zhang keeps going. He climbs 2 tall fences, another barbed wire fence, and finds himself in the tiger enclosure. The 3 tigers do what tigers do. They pounce on him, and disturbingly, there's footage to show it. The zookeepers use fireworks and water cannons to scare them away. It works with 2 tigers, but the third is undeterred. He continues to attack the man, pushing him down, ripping into him. Finally, they shoot the tiger. They rescue the man. It's too late, though. He dies of his injuries. What's interesting is Mr. Zhang's relatives blame the zoo for not implementing effective measures to avoid the tragedy. So I guess you could say the entrance where the gate was and the ticket was not sufficient. The signs, which are in every zoo, posted everywhere, are not adequate. The 2 nearly 10 feet tall walls and a 3rd barbed wire fence was not enough. That's right, the zoo is to blame for Mr. Zhang's death. And here in America, that kind of logic works for us too. We like to blame everybody else but the person who did it. And it's terrible what happened, but is it possible that the blame lies squarely with Mr. Zhang? Not with the zoo, not with the signs, not with the walls, not with the tigers, but just with him? We like to think poor old Uzzah was just on the wrong side of this thing. I mean, it wasn't his fault. I mean, he tried to do right. God did that to him. But why isn't it Uzzah's fault? And why isn't it not just that he didn't do this, but surely he had a messed up heart to have even been close to the ark? We think of him as good intention, but the word that uses in the scriptures to describe in the eyes of God is irreverent. Irreverent. Lacking reverence for God. Didn't care what God was like, what God would do, what God demanded, what God had said, and what he wanted of them. Now, I like to say every time I'm in the Old Testament, I'm so grateful I don't live under the old law anymore. But the problem really wasn't the old law. It was the people who tried to keep it who always seemed to not keep it. We have always been the one, we humans, who tend not to obey when it's very clear that we should obey. And it is so common for men and women to treat God as common and normal and average and so much like us, but he's not. He's God. And he's righteous, and he's holy, and he's perfect, and he is everything that we are not. And God deserves reverence and respect and obedience and honor, and he says, I will have honor. And if we are smart, we would give it to him now and always, not out of fear as if he could zap us, but out of great reverence that he deserves all of the honor that we could give him. Of course, we fear the Lord. It's right to do. A healthy fear is not just right, it's what the Word says. And not a shrinking fear, scared of what he could do, but a robust respect for who he is, just who he is. God hasn't changed in time, but things have changed in time, and gratefully so, all because of Jesus. And the distinction of what used to be and how different it is for us is spelled out pretty clearly in the book of Hebrews, chapter 12. Listen to this. You have not come to a mountain that cannot be touched, or that can be touched, and it is burning with fire, to darkness, to gloom, to storm, to a trumpet blast, or to such a voice speaking words that those who heard it begged that no further word be spoken to them, because they could not bear what was commanded. If even an animal touches the mountain, it's stoned to death. The sight was so terrifying, even Moses said, I'm trembling with fear. No, you now have come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. You have come now to thousands upon thousands of angels in joyful assembly, to the church of the firstborn whose names are written in heaven. You've come to God, the judge of all, to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. And then he finishes with this: therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful and so worship God acceptably, of course, with reverence and awe, for God is still a consuming fire. God is not our buddy next door. He's not the guy in the sky. His word is not a suggestion. His will is not a subpoint. His honor that is due him is not held off for long. God is a consuming fire, but through his Son Jesus, he has burned up our transgressions, taken them away, so we have a new hope, a new way to live, not in fear, but in respect and joy and honor and worship. God is honored, and he will be. Even today in heaven and in all of creation, it's only the human aspect that has the trouble. We're the ones who can't seem to get it right. But some people do get it right, and sometimes it takes them a couple tries. David tries it again, and this time gets it right. He gets the right people to carry the ark on the poles, as he should have already done, and they get there, finally to Jerusalem. 1 Chronicles 13-16 tells the story too, in some ways more detail. But here's the rest of the story. It goes like this, verse 14. Wearing a linen ephod, David was dancing before the Lord with all his might, while he and all Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord with shouts and the sound of trumpets. As the ark of the Lord was entering the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul, watched from a window. And when she saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, she despised him in her heart. They brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent that David had pitched for it, and David sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings before the Lord. And after he had finished sacrificing the burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord Almighty. Then he gave a loaf of bread, a cake of dates, a cake of raisins to every person in the crowd of Israelites, both men and women, and all the people went to their homes. Well, David returned home to bless his household, and Michal, daughter of Saul, notice it doesn't say his wife, Michal, daughter of Saul, came out to meet him and said, how the king of Israel, notice she doesn't say David, my husband, how the king of Israel has distinguished himself today. That's sarcasm. Going around half naked in full view of the slave girls of his servants, as any vulgar fellow would. That's just mean. David said to Michal, it was before the Lord who chose me rather than your father or anyone from his house when he appointed me ruler over the Lord's people Israel. I will celebrate before the Lord. I will become even more undignified than this, and I will be humiliated in my own eyes. But by these slave girls you spoke of, I'll be held in honor. And Michal, daughter of Saul, had no children to the day of her death. David dances with all of his might before the Lord, and Michal hates it and seems to hate him. She despises him. She's lost all respect for him, probably for several reasons, but doesn't mind pointing in his face and saying, you are a shameful man. I'm disgusted. We don't know if any of the things she says are true, but I guess the facts don't matter. It's what it looks like, and he looks ridiculous. You look like a fool. You're embarrassing. She can't believe what he's doing. And David rebukes her, putting her in her place, reminds her she's not in charge, neither is her father. He's dead. He's gone. I am in charge. The Lord has chosen me, and I will honor him. I will honor him any way I want. And those slave girls you speak of, they will too, even if you won't. And at the end of the story, it's just sad. Just that little verse, she's, I guess, barren. Either he has nothing more to do with her sexually so that she cannot conceive, or she cannot conceive, maybe as an act of God. Either way, it seems fitting. No more will be produced from her, not from her father and not from her. We'll leave the text there. We'll pick it up next time. But I do want to say just a couple more things before we're done. I know all of you aren't from the churches of Christ. Some of you are guests. But I want to speak to some of us, because I am very familiar with us, and I've been around a long time, and I just want to say some things that some of you may not understand. I'm so grateful for my heritage. I'm so grateful for my parents. So grateful for all the godly people and all the churches I've been in, for every class, for every assembly, for every person who's changed me and helped me and made me what I am. But I think it's okay to sometimes look at ourselves and say, could we do better? I'm not going to encourage us to get crazy. I'm not going to encourage us to start shouting and clapping and dancing. But I do think it would be okay if sometimes we did smile when we are in worship. I think it would be great if once in a while a little bit of excitement broke out. If a little joy showed up on our faces, as if it was really great to do. If we used a word or enacted a word, participated in a word that Paul liked to use, it's rejoice. And I'll say it again as he did, rejoice. There are times I wonder, by looking at us and watching us worship, if we think this is a chore. I got up early. I fought the rain. I got everybody in the car. I made it here. Isn't that good enough? And I wonder if we're glad we're here. I wonder if this has been an honor for us. And I think in our worship assemblies, at times, we have downplayed the emotional part of our worship. I think it's clear. We have elevated the somber and denigrated the exuberant. We have encouraged quiet and silence and stillness and shaken our heads at enthusiasm and excitement and celebration as if they're out of place. And I may be uncomfortable if anybody was to be overexcited. But I would like to see what God would think of that first before I think of what I think of that. And I know it says, and we can quote it, it should be done. All things should be done decently and in order, but I think we have helped define that as only ordinary, nothing out of the ordinary, nothing uncomfortable, everything like we always do. And I'm not encouraging us to do some things that are crazy and irrational and are weird, but I don't want to be the one that defines that either, because Michael defines that and David disagrees, and I think David is right. Michael is the criticizer. Michael is the fuddy-duddy. Michael is the despiser. Notice, Michael is not the worshiper. David is the worshiper, and David is embarrassing, and David is crazy, and David almost loses it. It's not even becoming what he's doing, it appears. But David is worshiping God, and he doesn't even seem to care what people think. So if I have a choice between the one worshiping or the one criticizing, I think I ought to be the one on my hands and knees, or with hands in the air, or doing a little dance, and I probably won't. But all in honor of God. I don't intend to change anything, really. I think if change happens, it should happen in here and in here. And if it happens in here, I think it'll happen on here. I don't want anybody to start doing things just because I said something. Please don't do something radical. Don't do something just crazy. Don't. But it wouldn't be bad if somebody said amen and somebody started to cry and somebody got on their knees. Somebody raised their hand. It wouldn't, thank you. It wouldn't be crazy. If the world says you're crazy, it wouldn't be dishonorable if people among us say that's dishonorable. And if everybody says, even a brother or sister, let's just keep calm here, it's okay. I don't know really that things would change. I don't know that they need to change in what we see or what we do. But I think I see myself sometimes in here when I hold up the mirror and I think I need to change. I think both of these stories, one is scary and one is comical in some ways. I think they're both about honor. I think they're both about honor, honoring the Lord. Live as if your life depends on it, because it does. Worship as if nobody is watching, because it really is an audience of one. Obey the Lord in what He says, because He is the Lord. Do what He says. Heed what He warns. Pay attention to what He desires. Are you paying attention to what He has said? Do you even know what He says? The world has a saying, it's been put to a poem and a song, dance as if nobody's watching. I grew up in churches of Christ, and I was not able to dance. I even had an excuse given to our elementary school for participating in the square dance of the day, because I wasn't supposed to, and that's okay. You don't have to dance. I'm not encouraging anyone to dance. This isn't really about dancing. It's about the heart of a man named David, who was obligated in heart to wear himself out any way he could in honor of the Lord. It was giving his whole heart, and he didn't care what even his wife said. As the king of Israel, who could be becoming, who became beside himself in some ways, throwing all of that as if he didn't care, as only he could worship and sing and dance, because it was an audience of one. Maybe you've heard stories like these two dads, without getting into all the details. This Kansas dad, who his son had this cancer in his head, so they took away all of his hair, and he has a big horseshoe scar on his head. And the dad tattooed a scar on his head just for his son. Another dad, a big man, hat backwards, goes to his daughter's practice for the recital. And his daughter's up there with the other girls in a tutu. He's got a kid in one hand, and when she freaks out, he gets up on stage and dances too. This is not for a son or a daughter. This is for the Lord. And what it says is David danced before the Lord with all of his might. So it's not really about dancing. Can we let dancing go? Could that be said of you in your worship? That today you gave everything you had. You worship the Lord with all of your might. Or did you today just show up and you're about to leave and nothing will be different? How about from now on, even if nothing changes among us, in here, we wear ourselves out in honor of the Lord, so that we would give so much energy that maybe people would say, "You're nuts." And even out there, people may laugh and they may mock us. They may think we are a joke. But we will worship the Lord and honor Him as an audience of one. Let's stand and sing. Come if you need to.